cook it, and that way we can give everybody a good dinner before we have a fun night. All right, 2 Samuel 14. Last week we looked at the account of the rape of Amnon and then the revenge of Absalom, her brother, or the rape of Tamar by Amnon, and Absalom avenging Tamar. And then we ended chapter 13, and this is important to remember because it really does lead us in. And this is one of those places where chapter breaks can really kind of mess you up. We ended chapter 13, verse 39. It says, "The heart of King David longed to go out to Absalom, for he was comforted concerning Amnon since he was dead." And there was this longing of David for reconciliation, or to bring Absalom home. He is grieving over Amnon, but Amnon's dead. But he has a son who's still alive, who is now separated from him by a situation of ultimately Amnon's creation. And so David verse 39 leaves us with this understanding that he is troubled in this moment, that his son has been put in this difficult place and has had to flee because of the actions of the other son whom he killed. He avenged his sister's honor against him. And so then we pick up in verse 14, and you kind of get this outright, very clear thing. It says, "Now Joab, the son of Zeruiah, perceived that the king's heart was inclined towards Absalom." Now, we are reading this many thousands of years after the events, and we have the benefit of, and I'm thinking back to literature, and I can't remember what it's called, but when you have like the third-person narrator that just tells you the stuff. What is that, Savannah? Anyway, y'all all know what I'm talking about. You get the narrator in the story, right? That he's coming from outside the story, telling you about what's going on inside the story. So we have the benefit of verse 39 in chapter 13 that tells us that David longed for Absalom. Like his heart went out to him. But then we get to verse 1 of chapter 14, and it says, "Joab perceived that David his heart was inclined towards Absalom." He was still fond of his son. He was not angry with him, that he still had feelings for his son. Okay, so we get that. So 2 verses back to back. Again, we're separating it by chapter. The original does not have chapters, and so it would literally be 2 sequential sentences that say essentially the same thing from the perspective of the narrator and then from like Joab's perspective. One states it as fact, the other one says that Joab perceived it. And so this is a situation, this is a point of the story that is important and that sometimes you miss if you're just reading chapter by chapter and you're doing it the way we're doing it, but it's important to sometimes go back and look at what immediately just happened. So 2 sentences back to back. David, his heart is inclined. He has a fondness for his son Absalom. Okay? And that's really important going forward. Verse 2. "So Joab sent to Tekoa and brought a wise woman from there and said to her, 'Please pretend to be a mourner and put on mourning garments now, and do not anoint yourself with oil, but be like a woman who has been mourning for the dead many days. Then go to the king and speak to him in this manner.' So Joab put the words in her mouth." This is some wording. It's not in our normal way of speaking now, in our normal vernacular, so just to make sure everybody's on the same page. Joab realizes David still longs for his son. So he goes, he's sent to Tekoa. He didn't go to Tekoa. He sent to Tekoa and brought a wise woman from Tekoa, and he gets her, he's asking her to do something. Put on the clothes of someone who is in mourning. Now, why do you think he went to a far-off place to get a wise person for this act? David's in Jerusalem. He had to get somebody. If you're going to try to lie to the king, you better be far enough away that he can't find out the truth very easily. Okay? So it had to be somebody that no chance of him knowing, in a situation he wouldn't be familiar with. Okay? That's important. So he sends to Tekoa. He brings back this wise woman, and he tells her to dress as though she is in mourning. Do not anoint yourself. Don't pretty yourself up at all. You're in sackcloth, dark clothes. You are in mourning. That's how he tells her to dress. And then it says he puts the words in her mouth. He tells her what to say. And that's where we pick up in the next verse. Verse 4 says, Now when the woman of Tekoa spoke to the king, she fell on her face to the ground and prostrated herself and said, Help, O king. Now, in Israel, and in a lot of ancient cultures, but it was true in Israel, that if you had an issue where you needed justice or you needed judgment, somebody to make a decision from on high, you could go. They go to the city gates. We know in Proverbs 31 that was one of the things that he lifts her up, that she goes to the city gates. We know that's where the wise people sit. We see that in the story of Ruth. The gates of the city are where a lot of things would take place, a lot of decision making and judgments and rulings. But everybody could appeal ultimately to the king. And so just like you've seen in countless accounts of ancient societies, you could go and petition the king for a judgment or for mercy or a ruling or something like that. You could petition all the way up to the king. And so that's part of the ruse. She's in mourning. She goes to the king and she cries out, Help, O king. So she's coming in petitioning the king for something. Verse 5, the king said to her, What is your trouble? And she answered, Truly I am a widow, for my husband is dead. That's important. Remember that. She's a widow. Your maidservant had 2 sons, but the 2 of them struggled together in the field, and there was no one to separate them. So one struck the other and killed him. Think Cain and Abel, but we don't know the motives behind it. Okay? 2 brothers struggling in a field. One kills the other. It seems at first glance that this would be somewhat accidental or at least unintentional. You know, you think you're fighting and the fight goes too far. Okay? Now, I've never been this type of fight apparently, but that's what seems to be the petition here. Verse 7, Now behold, the whole family has risen against your maidservant, and they say, Hand over the one who struck his brother, that we may put him to death for the life of his brother whom he killed, and destroy the heir also. Thus they will extinguish my coal which is left, so as to leave my husband neither name nor remnant on the face of the earth. Why is this? You got to know a little bit about Hebrew culture to understand what she's talking about. Who are the people going after, again, fake story, but going after the other son? Who are these people? In Hebrew culture, as laid out by the law, and you can find this in Numbers 35, verses 9 through 34, is where you run into the cities of refuge and blood avengers, okay? And that's not, the latest Marvel movie. It is, sorry, that was corny. But The kinsman redeemer is one of the examples of this, but even if it wasn't a kinsman that would redeem, people would avenge the blood of someone killed who was not able clearly to avenge themselves. Most of the time when you have conflicting families, it would be the family of the slain person would go after the individual who killed their family member. And the way that the person could try to prolong justice, not that they could totally escape it, but they could go to a city of refuge. And if they went to one of the cities of refuge, the blood avengers could not exercise judgment on that individual until the case was heard by an official or a magistrate or judge, think something like that. That's the situation that's being painted here. This situation, you have two brothers who have struggled. One has killed the other one. And so the blood avengers now are coming in from the community. It's her son. She's a widow. The dad's dead. And it's just the community. But remember, this would have all been family extended. It's they all would have been related somehow. And so it's not real far stretched. But these are not the one family trying to exercise judgment on another family. These are just people who are trying to produce justice. Okay? And so this blood avenging to come and to execute justice on the guilty party. But for the widow, she's crying out and says, if they do this, my husband, who is dead, we only had 2 sons, my other son's dead. If this one is killed, we have no one left. Now, why is that a big deal in Hebrew culture? The idea of lineage is so important that they enacted the concept of levirate marriage, so that if a man dies without an heir, his brother, I know this is kind of disturbing now, but his brother would try to produce an heir, because it is through the land was assigned to the different families, and the land has to stay within the family. And if nobody still is left of the family to inherit the land, to carry on the name, then it is died. And the idea of a remnant being left perpetually was an idea enacted by God. God has always promised a remnant. And so this concept of always making sure that a family never dies out is really big and important in this culture. And so that is the appeal that she's crying out with. She's gone to David. One son's dead, husband's dead. Now they're trying to avenge my existing son when it wasn't murder. That's what she's implying. And they're trying to do this. Please protect him. Verse 8, then the king said to the woman, go to your house, and I will give orders concerning you. The woman of Tekoa said to the king, O my lord the king, the iniquity is on me and my father's house, but the king and his throne are guiltless. So again, listen, we're not escaping guilt. It's on us, but thank you, you're guiltless. Verse 10, so the king said, whoever speaks to you, bring him to me, and he will not touch you anymore. Then she said, please let the king remember the Lord your God, so that the avenger of blood will not continue to destroy, otherwise they will destroy my son. And he said, as the Lord lives, not one hair of your son shall fall to the ground. Then the woman said, please let your maidservant speak a word to my lord the king. And he said, speak. So you can see her kind of getting ready to spring the trap on him. He's given judgment. Listen, ma'am, nothing's going to happen to your son. If anybody has an issue, anybody wants to go after him, send them to me. But they're going to kill him. No, nothing's going to happen to your son. And then she says, listen, can I please let your maidservant speak a word? Do I have permission to speak? You have to understand. So when you look at this, and it's kind of funny. First reading, she's just done what? What has she been doing to the king for the last, paragraph? Well, she's been lying, yes. But she's been speaking. So why then would she say, oh, please let me speak to the king? Why does he have to grant her permission? She's not asking to literally speak. She's asking to speak freely. Can I say something honest to you? Like that's what she's requesting here. So he tells her, speak. Verse 13, the woman said, why then have you planned such a thing against the people of God? For in speaking this word, the king is as one who is guilty, and that the king does not bring back his banished one. For we will surely die, and are like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Yet God does not take away life, but plans ways so that the banished ones will not be cast out from him. What is she talking about? David has a son that's been killed by another son. This lady, in her story, in her lie, has pleaded on behalf of her remaining son to not be killed so that a remnant will remain. Her husband's bloodline continues, the family name goes on. Okay, that's what the story is. So then when she asks to speak freely, she says, David, you are guilty in this. You speak as a guilty one, in that you have not brought back your banished son. Your son that's in exile, you have not called him back. Now, it's important to notice, David did not send Absalom away. Absalom fled for fear of being persecuted by the people. But the same way that David has the authority in this lie perpetrated by this woman from Tekoa to rule in judgment and say, nobody's going to harm your son, he could do the same thing in regard to his own son. He is the ultimate authority in Egypt. But for David, it is a little more complex. Because while mercy as a parent and mercy for a parent or compassion for a parent is easy to give, as the top lawgiver in the country, you can kind of also feel David not wanting to give preferential treatment. But was Absalom wrong in the killing of his brother? And before you answer that too quickly, in that, by today's standard, we're going, well, murder's always wrong. No, according to the Old Testament law, there was some provisions. He would have had a right to avenge his sister in the event of what took place, particularly when his father refused to. So this is not a very clear-cut situation that David finds himself in relation to Absalom, but the lady, again, by the spurning of Joab, says, you should have called home Absalom out of exile. He has been banished. He's in hiding. You should have restored him, because by not doing it, you have made you put all of us at risk. Verse 14 there, look at the beginning of it. For we will surely die, and like water spilled on the ground, which cannot be gathered up again. Why does she say that everybody's going to die for not bringing him back? If you have a man whose guilt or innocence is very easily in question, again, if you are a pro-Amnon person, you probably think Absalom needs to be killed. If you are a pro-Absalom person, you think Amnon got what he deserved. David has to somehow pick a side, but regardless, you got royal family that's potentially about to be fighting. When you have royals entering into warfare with each other, who suffers the most? The people. And so that's kind of what she's getting at here. Is that, listen, by you not addressing this situation, we are all fixing to suffer. And in verse 14, she states a truth that in one of the commentaries I looked at said this is one of the most clear expressions of the gospel in the Old Testament. I don't know about degrees, but it is a clear expression of the gospel. In verse 14, it says, "Yet God does not take away life, but plans ways so that the banished ones will not be cast out from Him." If you think about us, and He's planning ways, we are the banished ones. We are the ones who deserve death. It's just one of these truths about God's character that God is not one who just gives up on people. The story of redemption is a story of God saying, no, I'm not going to just let y'all go. Because again, He would have been right to do so. He would have been just had He decided to. But He didn't. It's in His character not to just let somebody go. And so the appeal she's making is this is not in God's character, so it shouldn't be in yours to just let Him go. You fight for Him. And so that's the plea she's making. Verse 15 says, "Now the reason I have come to speak this word to my lord the king is that the people have made me afraid. So your maidservant said, let me now speak to the king. Perhaps the king will perform the request of his maidservant." So again, she's saying, I'm coming to you. She's got the ruse, the lie still going. I'm coming to you because I'm scared. And she hopes that maybe the king will perform the request of his maidservant. For the king will hear and deliver his maidservant from the hand of the man who would destroy both me and my son from the inheritance of God. Then your maidservant said, please let the word of my lord the king be comforting as the angel of God. So is my lord the king to discern good and evil. And may the Lord your God be with you. Okay? So she says angel of God. No, in the Old Testament, angel and messenger. She's not necessarily saying literally he is an angelic being, but he's speaking as a messenger of God. And so he's speaking and that he can discern good and evil because he's the messenger of God. And then David's still wise. David is still king, and God's still God's hand is still on David. Okay? So look at verse 18. Then the king answered and said to the woman, please do not hide anything from me that I'm about to ask you. And the woman said, let my lord the king please speak. So the king said, is the hand of Joab with you in all of this? Just imagine you're this woman, okay? Joab, the general of the army, the head army person in Israel, sends and requests for you to come and says, hey, I need you to go and do this for me. You're going to dress this way. You're going to say these things to the king. And you know he's got a ruse. We don't know if she knows why this is being requested, to some degree. Like this is Joab's working. Is Joab trying to... is he trying to rally the troops behind Absalom and there really is about to be a war and she's actually bringing it on, not preventing it? Like, we don't know how far she is in the story or in the details, but she's doing what Joab has asked her to do. So she goes before the king. She makes this request. David's going along with it. Then all of a sudden David says, all right, you've asked to speak clearly to me. Let me speak clearly to you. Did Joab put you up to this? And he asked her just as straightforward as he could. Is Joab behind all of this? Continuing in verse 19, and the woman replied, as your soul lives, my lord the king, no one can turn to the right or to the left from anything that my lord the king has spoken. Indeed, it was your servant Joab who commanded me, and it was he who put all these words into the mouth of your maidservant. In order to change the appearance of things, your servant Joab has done this thing, but my Lord is wise, like the wisdom of the angel of God, to know all that is in the earth. So, I think she acts very wisely in this moment. She answers yes. If you're speaking to the king, you're trying to tell him a lie, he recognizes not only that you're lying, but who put you up to this lie, and then asks you, is this true? you kind of, the best course of action is to say, yes, that's all true. This is what it is. Verse 21. Then the king said to Joab, behold, now I will surely do this thing. Go therefore, bring back the young man Absalom. Joab fell on his face to the ground, prostrated himself, and blessed the king. Then Joab said, today your servant knows that I have found favor in your sight, O my lord, the king, in that the king has performed the request of his servant. So Joab arose and went to Geshur and brought Absalom to Jerusalem. However, the king said, let him turn to his own house, and let him not see my face. So Absalom turned to his own house and did not see the king's face. Again, all of this is important. There's a lot of stuff that's going on here that we just kind of have to keep in mind. So, the story of the woman from Tekoa. She uses David's compassion towards a family in distress and a person who acted not even, the question of honor isn't even as great in that story, at least from what we're told about it, compared to what Absalom and Amnon did. I mean, that's truly, it can kind of go up in the air as whether guilt or innocence or justified, not justified in the killing of his brother. And yet when Joab, he calls Joab in, and after, getting confirmation that Joab was behind all of this, he calls Joab in and says, fine, you can send to Geshur, tell Absalom to come home. And Joab is just beside himself. I guess he probably heard from the woman from Tekoa, and she's like, the king knows. And so he falls down and owns the request that, you've blessed your servant and honoring this request. But David still, and at the end of verse 24 there is really important to notice, he says, listen, when he comes back, you send him to his house. He does not look upon my face. Why would David do this? David's already demonstrated that he has compassion towards a family in distress. So why is it that when it's his family that's in distress, he says, yeah, you can come home? Again, the last verse in chapter 13 and the first verse of chapter 14 say what? That David's heart was inclined toward his son. He loved his son. We've seen the compassion for families in distress. And yet now when he tells his son he can come home, he tells him, you can go to your house, but you don't look on my face. Why would David do that? Anybody want to give that one a go? David is still in this point, when I said that he's kind of caught in this difficult position. He's caught in the difficult position, one, because he is both a father and a man, and it's easy, most men can tell you, it's easy for me to be compassionate with other people's kids a lot more than it's easy for me to be compassionate with my kids sometimes. None of y'all's kids bother me. Ever. And I mean that sincerely. Them running around screaming, knocking chairs over, I think it's adorable. Mine do it. I'm going to be turkey walking them down the hall as I'm pulling my belt off, and hopefully we're out of sight when I start hitting them. Maybe. You get what I'm saying? For most men, it is not uncommon, and then maybe women too, but I can only speak from the dad perspective. I am much more compassionate with other people's children than I am my own, because I am raising mine, and they reflect on who? Me. David, don't be looking at your kid, Ken. I'm not, you're nothing. No man, yeah. David takes it one step further, right? So your kids are a reflection on you. David, it goes one step further because why is the sword still in his family? Why has the sword never left his family? Because of his sin with Bathsheba, because of the murder of Uriah the Hittite, Nathan the prophet came in and said, because you have done this, the sword will never leave your family. So David, when he says that, like, from my perspective, again, as a dad, my kids reflect on my character. Like, their actions say something about me, whether they do or don't. That's how I feel. But in David's situation, this truly is a result of his actions and his sin. And so when he says that, yes, I should let my son come home, but I don't want to see him. I love him, but I can't look at him. And you can just feel the weight of the entire situation from David's perspective in this moment. And so we need to keep going. Verse 25. Now in all of Israel was no one as handsome as Absalom, so highly praised. From the sole of his foot to the crown of his head, there was no defect in him. What in the world does this have to do with the story? Absalom was a good-looking dude. Nothing. It's just a description. I don't know. I can't tell you why it's in there. It seems kind of out of place, but that's where it is. Huh? I'll give you that. This is the guy they're going to want to come get me. And it does end up being that way. Yeah. I agree. That sounds good. That is as wonderful an explanation as I could have clearly didn't come up with. I was going, I don't know. God put it in here. It's in there for a reason. I just ain't on it. And it gets a little more weird, other than what Ken explained. Verse 26, when he cut the hair of his head, and it was at the end of every year that he cut it. He only cut his hair one time a year. For it was heavy on him, so that he cut it. He weighed the hair of his head at 200 shekels by the king's weight. So I'm thinking Jewish Fabio. Anybody remember Fabio? That long hair, beautiful man. That's what you got here. Hey, y'all reading it? That's what it says. His hair weighed 200 shekels when he cut it one time a year. I can't grow 200 shekels worth of hair in a year. Verse 27. To Absalom there was born 3 sons and 1 daughter, whose name was Tamar. She was a woman of beautiful appearance. Now, again, this is just some insight into the fact that, one, it kind of reminds us that he's not a boy. This is a man. He's got 3 kids. And, 4 kids, 3 sons and a daughter. And the daughter he named Tamar for his sister. And so we see that again, that love for his sister. Again, almost speaking that in David's eyes, he is justified. He's been justified in everything he's done. Verse 28, now Absalom lived 2 full years in Jerusalem and did not see the king's face. So when David said he's allowed in, but he's not to lay eyes on me, David meant it. 2 years in Jerusalem. He's back from Geshur, and he has not seen his father, the king. Verse 29, then Absalom sent for Joab to send him to the king, but he would not come to him. So he sent again a second time, and he would not come. I'm sorry, this is where the story's about to get kind of funny, so don't read ahead. Absalom is under house arrest for 2 years, essentially. He can't go to the king. I say house arrest. He may be free to leave his house, but he can't go to his dad. So whatever, he hasn't seen his dad for 2 years. So he sends to Joab, and he says, listen, man, you got me home. Thank you. I want to go see the king. Clearly you have favor with the king. Get me in to see the king. So he's sending for Joab, but Joab won't come. So he sends a second time. Joab still won't come. That's the request he's trying to make. Joab will not come to Absalom either. So, verse 30, therefore he said to his servant, see Joab's field is next to mine, and he has barley there. Go and set it on fire. So Absalom's servant set the fields on fire. Then Joab arose, came to Absalom at his house, and said to him, why have your servant set my field on fire? You want to get somebody's attention 4,000 years ago, or right now, you go set their field on fire and let them know who did it. Clearly Joab knew who did it, because he came straight to Absalom and said, why did you set my field on fire? And so, again, this is just one of these stories that it's amusing. I enjoy it. Verse 32, Absalom answered Joab, behold, I sent for you, saying, come here, that I may send you to the king to say, why have I come from Geshur? It would be better for me still to be there. Now therefore let me see the king's face, and if there is iniquity in me, let him put me to death. I told you, when Absalom named his daughter Tamar, in his mind he's showing the affection for his sister. This is a demonstration of his uprightness, that he's naming his daughter for his sister that was wronged and he had to avenge, even to the point of killing his brother. And so he comes, and when he does finally get before Joab, he said, listen, you've got to go before the king. You got to get me to see him. It would have been better for me to stay in Geshur than to be here and living under this, this kind of restriction that's been placed upon me by the king. I need you to go do this, and I need to get in front of him, and if he finds me guilty, he can put me to death. But I want to see my dad. Get me before the king. Verse 33, so when Joab came to the king and told him, he called for Absalom. Thus he came to the king and prostrated himself on his face to the ground before the king, and the king kissed Absalom. Now, there is an apparent reconciliation. And I say apparent because if you know the story, you know Absalom and David, they're not done. But David, again, probably out of guilt and shame, did not call his son back to himself, show the compassion and the mercy. It says that David knew of Amnon's sin for years and wouldn't act. So he knows what Amnon did, which means he would have known that Absalom was justified in his actions. Justice was not being done on behalf of Tamar to avenge her. And so when Absalom took matters into his own hand, David did nothing. Absalom then flees. David does nothing. He then allows him to come home for 2 years. David does nothing. And so this situation that is almost at a boiling point is really not only created by David's hand in that he's the one who committed the sin with Bathsheba that led to all of this, but his handling of this situation was such that he created enmity between himself and his son that ultimately would boil up. And so in this moment, he does allow his son to come to him after his son has to plea and get Joab involved again. And he comes in, he prostrates himself on the ground before his father, and his father kisses him. And we don't know if it was, just I see you, I recognize you, it's good to see you, or if it was more intimate or more personable, like sincere, I guess would be the best description. Like you don't know if it's a dad that's truly remorseful and missing his son and grabs him up and kisses him, or is this just a, yes, son, I see you, and gives him a kiss on the cheek and, then walks out of the room. We don't know. He kisses him. He receives him. He gives him a kiss. But whatever the situation, for all this time that this has gone on, this underlying tension just continues to grow between David and Absalom. And we'll see that start to boil over in the next few chapters. Anybody have anything you want to add, take away, ask a question? All right. Before I pray and dismiss us, if your name's not on some sign-ups out there, just go out there, sign up, write it on there, trunk or treat. Making sure I say this right. Apparently Sunday I messed up on my announcements, and very few people told me. I won't say the people who came up and told me that I messed up, but there were a few. I messed up. Trunk or treat. Go sign up for trunk or treat. Fair serve night for the 7 to 9 shift. Go sign up. If you sign up and you have not received your ticket, you get in free to the fair. You get a ticket to get in free on that Tuesday night. You need to go find Erica Welch. She'll give you your ticket, and so you can make sure you get in. If you ordered a shirt for fair for the serve, they're all in the fellowship hall. You need to go in there and get it too. So let's pray, and we'll be dismissed. Lord, thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for your word. God, I thank you that in Scripture we see just a true picture of the human condition. We see a wonderful representation of your character. And God, I thank you that throughout all of it, Lord, you were consistent. And so I just pray that as we study your word, we will be drawn closer and closer to you day after day and year after year of study, God, for an entire lifetime. We love you and we praise you. We ask all this in your name. Amen.